sometime around 1924, Edward, Prince of Wales, having visited America, made this observation. The thing that impresses me the most about America is the way the parents obey their children. You'll notice that that's backwards the way it should be. And you'll notice that was said almost 100 years ago, which means that this is a long cultural problem in America. One that surrounds us, one that influences us, and one that is trying to shape how we train our children. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. American culture says, parents, obey your children in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your children, so that it may be well with them, and that they may live long on the earth. That's how that would read if American culture wrote it. What it actually says is, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor, remember that for later, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. Child Training 101, the last part. Part 1, children have the potential for good and for bad. We have to realize that. God commands parents to guide them. Part 2, parents must realize their training ability is very limited and have faith that God is helping at the same time. Without the latter part, it doesn't matter what you do in the first part. The parents themselves living godly lives is 90% of the work of parenting. I made up that number. I don't know what the number is, but it's significant. There was a fable about a young man who was drowning. And he calls out to his father, "Father, save me!" And while he's drowning, his father hears him and starts to lecture him on how he shouldn't have gone out there into the water and how he shouldn't do that again. And while his father is lecturing him, the boy drowns. Lecturing is important, but not only lecturing. Part 4, parents must obviously and lavishly love their children for training to take root. That's what God does for us. He loves us so much that it's undeniable that He does. It's obvious. And He gives and gives and gives and gives more. And it comes with the expectation that we will understand He loves us and we will obey Him. These are kind of the context in which we are raising our children, and any specific training will occur. Part 5, ultimately, this is last week, parents are trying to train their children to love the Lord. We give them facts. We must give them facts. At an early age, we start giving them facts. But if all we ever did was give them facts, then we have missed out. Part 6, the last part, understanding obedience and encouraging it. That's what we're going to talk about today. If you're visiting us, we pray that what we say and what we do is bringing glory to God. If you expect us to do something else, or expect us not to have done what we did do, then please ask us. We're trying to bring glory to God. If we can help each other understand how to do that better, then that will be a good thing. And we're grateful for everyone's presence here this morning. Understanding and encouraging obedience. What we're looking for here really is complete and immediate compliance. That is obedience. Now we'll have some they will paint pictures. We'll have some passages that illustrate this and passages that illustrate it not happening. But you may wonder, why in the world are we talking about this? This is so basic. Well, it's about as far as I can go. And also, I was on the phone with Toby Williford this week. And he said to me, we were talking about the crazy times are crazy right now. And what he said to me, I am amazed at the things I am hearing from people whom I otherwise had always thought of as reasonable. Things that we assume a given are turning out to be not given at all. You know, a word about the chaos of the times. The times are always chaotic. Ever since Genesis chapter 3, you leave the Lord, you have chaos. That's what Ephesians 6 is about. There's war going on. Daniel 11, it's about wars going on. There has always been chaos. It's only really, really, really being emphasized and illustrated right now. Understanding obedience. What are we looking for when we talk about obedience? We want our children to obey. Well, what exactly are we looking for? Mark 4 will illustrate it. The word in Ephesians, children obey, is our word here in Mark 4. We'll see it. Verse 35, Mark 4:35. On that day when evening came, he, that's Jesus, said to them, let us go over to the other side of the sea. And leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was. And the other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filled up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. They woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Hush and be still. And the wind died down and became perfectly calm. He said to them, Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And they became very much afraid and said to one another, Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? That's the same word in Ephesians that children are supposed to do for their parents. That's why I turn here, to illustrate what are we looking for in our children when we say, children, obey your parents. You'll notice that the weather was throwing a little hissy fit, wasn't it? Don't miss why I turn to this passage. Have you ever had to say to your child, hush? Be still? You want the outcome to be them being calm? These are these words. Notice, he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Hush and be still. And the wind died down and it became, and my version says, perfectly calm. Literally, great calm. That's what we want, right? I'd like you to be greatly calm. That's what he said. That's what he wanted. And that's what occurred. That's the compliance that we're looking for. Understand obedience, that when we say obey, what we're trying to see, the picture is compliance with what we said. Matthew 8, verse 1. Now I'm going to have you put your finger in Matthew 8 because I'll turn out of it and then back. But verse 1. When Jesus came down from the mountain, the large crowds followed him. And a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy was cleansed. Now the word obey is not here. But the concept is, the word obey literally is listen. And you can tell that listening happened. Jesus said, be cleansed. And the next word is, he was cleansed. He did exactly, the leprosy, did exactly what Jesus wanted it to. This is an illustration of obedience. And notice the word immediately. When something is in complete subjection, it immediately fully complies. That's the picture of obedience that we're looking for. Now keep your finger here, and you'll see in Matthew chapter, 4? Verse 18. Now, as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, Matthew 4:18, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." So here's the command. This is what he wants to effect in them. Immediately, they left their nets and followed him. We have an illustration of wonderful obedience right here. Verse 21, going on from there, he saw two brothers, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father, and they followed him. Again, we have this wonderful picture of obedience. Notice, these are adults. This is what we want to see in our children. In fact, we want to see it not actually so much in our children, but in our children when they become adults. That's really what we're going for. And to help them in that, we want to see that in them as children. Practice now, so when you get to be grown up and Jesus says come, you come immediately. Back in chapter 8, verse 5. When Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, imploring him, saying, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented." Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion said, "Lord, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For," this is how he knows, "for I am also a man under authority, with soldiers under me." So he gets it from every direction. He understands, actually the word obedience is not here, but authority or power is, and that's whom you would obey. "I say to this one, go," and he goes. Have you ever said to your child, "Go"? And to the other, "Come." Have you ever said to your child, "Come"? What do you expect? And he comes. "And to my slave, do this." Have you ever said to your child, "Do this"? What do you expect out of them? I want you to obey when I say, "Go, come, do this, shush, be silent, sit, stand." What am I looking for? What do I want to train in you? And he does it. Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who were following, "Truly I say to you, I have not found in Israel such great faith with anyone in Israel." Not only the faith, but behind the faith, inherently attached to the faith, is the complete understanding of obedience. Mark 1. Another illustration of this word being used to obey. Verse 23. Just then, Mark 1:23, there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." Throwing him into convulsions, the unclean spirit cried out with a loud voice and came out of him. They were all amazed, so that they debated among themselves, saying, "What is this a new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." Another illustration of obedience. But you noticed a difference in this illustration, didn't you? When they came out, as they were coming out, they threw a fit. Now I know that they didn't have to do that. I know it for a variety of reasons. One of them is, do you remember that passage that said there was a great calm? That's what true obedience looks like. Immediate, complete, perfect compliance. But I also know it in Mark chapter 5. Remember, he heals the man who had legion. Very interesting wording. Verse 5, constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs, in the mountains, and gashing himself with stones. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him, and shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, the Son of God, of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he began to implore him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby on the mountain. The demons implored him, saying, "Send us into the swine so that we may enter them." Jesus gave them permission. Now listen. And coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine. Why didn't they do that at first? I don't know. But did you notice? Verse 8. He had been saying to them, "Leave." But they were not. But they could have, because in the end they did. You ever experienced that with your children? Genesis 19. A couple more illustrations of imperfect, if not non-obedience. I normally do not preach to the children, but I sure hope they are listening. But this is for parents, so that we can help our children. Genesis 19, this is where God comes to Lot and says, "Lot, you got to get out, or I'm going to, and I am going to destroy Sodom." Verse 15, when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he hesitated. This morning we studied in John chapter 5. Jesus said that he does whatever the Father does in like manner. Could you imagine the Father saying to the Son, "Get up," and the Son hesitating? No. You're not going to imagine that. This is not obedience. Get that. That's what we need to get. This is not obedience. I know it because of what Jesus does. I also know it because of the word that's used in verse 16. He hesitated. So the men seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his 2 daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was on him. If he had obeyed, he would not have needed that compassion. I understand there's more to the compassion, but right there, he hesitated. And they grabbed him by the hand, and in that case, some version says, merciful. By the way, there is a time for compassion and mercy. And I know I'm going to forget to mention that. And it's extremely important. Please remember I said it now, and use wisdom. Use your wisdom. There is a time for compassion. I see it right here. Thank God for his compassion. And as parents, we need to be compassionate too while we're expecting perfect, ideal, complete, immediate obedience. Verse 17, when they had brought them outside, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountain, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, and we do not again have obedience. "Oh no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Now behold, the town is near enough to flee to. It is small. Please let me escape there. Is it not small, that my life may be spared?" And he said to him, "Behold, I grant you this request also." Number 2 occurrence of Lot not obeying. "I have indulged your person in reference to this manner." One translation of the Septuagint. "I've indulged you," says the angel, the Lord. I have had respect to thee. This is backwards. I have accepted thee concerning this thing also. I have favored you. All these words say this is not obedience. Now, get it. I get that there is a time for compassion and a time for favoring them, but right now we're trying to see what a picture is or is not of obedience, and this is not obedience. By the way, big flashing note here. When you say to your child anything that they must comply with, and they reply with anything other than yes ma'am or yes sir, they need to be cut off right there. Even if what they're about to say is reasonable, even if the first thing they say is whatever you've worked out in your house is a respectful way of complying. Okay, yes ma'am, yes sir. And they might even go on to suggest something reasonable. You might allow that. You might not. If they do, in their mind, remember all this is just so reasonable to lie. In their mind, when you then say no, that's it. Because they could go on forever suggesting alternatives, can't they? Forever and ever and ever. Make sure you understand what they're doing. When they come to you with, but they are not obeying. Get that clear picture in your mind. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Samuel is king. God tells him to wipe out the Amalekites. Verse 3, 1 Samuel 15:3. Now go and strike Amalek and utterly destroy all that he has. Do not spare him, but put to death both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Get rid of it all. So Saul summons the people. Verse 8. He captured Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Did you catch that? But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good. They were not willing to destroy them utterly, but everything despised and worthless, and they utterly destroyed. Understand what this is. We would call it maybe partial obedience. But understand what partial obedience is. Let's read what God, he did such a good job. She did such a good job. She listened to some of it. Listen. Verse 10. The word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands. But he did some. No, he did not. Verse 13. Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, Blessed are you of the Lord, I have carried out the command of the Lord. And Samuel, in irony, says, well, then what is the noise? Verse 17, Samuel said, is it not true? Verse 19, why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord, but rushed upon the spoil, and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord? He let somebody live, and that was evil. How was it evil? He had not complied. That's simply how it's evil. Verse 20, Saul said to Samuel, I did obey the voice of the Lord, and went on the mission which the Lord sent me, and have brought back Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took some of the spoil of sheep and oxen, the choicest of the things devoted to destruction, to the sacrifice of the Lord your God at Gilgal. Samuel said, has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? To obey is better than to sacrifice. Oh, we were being religious. Now, generally, you won't get that out of a young child. But you will get something that substitutes for, but we had good intentions. To obey. Good intentions are good. But we're talking about obedience here. To obey is better than to sacrifice. To heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is of the sin of divination. It's rebellion. It's sin. Insubordination is as iniquity and idolatry. Understand, when the child comes up to you and says, I did part of it, and it was within my control to do all of it, but I did not do all of it. Understand what you're looking at here. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, and he has rejected you from being king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. Right, Saul? He finally admitted it, what it was. For this one, look up here. In 1450 BC or somewhere thereabouts in Deuteronomy 12, God says, I'm going to tell you where to sacrifice from now on. That's the only place that you sacrifice. You can worship me, you can pray to me, you can sing to me, all over the place. But when I say sacrifice and burn incense, you do it where I tell you to. Later on, the Ark of the Covenant will be moved to Jerusalem by David, and sacrifices will be made there at that time. God said Jerusalem. And he also says in the temple. Now, the question is, when did they obey? Something's about to happen. You'll see it in the language. When did they obey? And what was everything else? Okay? So, what am I talking about? Read this. At about 970 BC, Solomon, it says, the people were still sacrificing to the high places. Sometimes the high places of the Old Testament referred to false gods. Sometimes they do not. Hezekiah will tear down the high places, and Rabshakeh will say, Hezekiah took down the high places of the Lord, because that's to whom they are sacrificing. Even in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 2 through 4, it talks about it. But listen, the people were still sacrificing on the high places. In other words, they were sacrificing wherever they wanted to, not only in Jerusalem at the altar. 870, the high places were not taken down. 850, the high places were not taken down. 795, 765, 740, 730, and then here we have Hezekiah. He removed the high places. Now, where did Israel obey? Here. That's where they obeyed. What does that make all this? Not obeying. All of that is not obeying. Now, in this case, it takes 300 years of them not obeying. But sometimes it takes 30 seconds. But realize what it is during those 30 seconds. I told you to do this. And I grant that there are different circumstances where it's going to take 30 seconds. But sometimes it should have already happened by the time 10 seconds were gone. And while it's not happening, understand what it is. It is not obedience. Leviticus chapter 10. Remember where God said it is better to obey than to sacrifice? Leviticus chapter 10 teaches this principle. Verse 1. Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire, which he had not commanded them. This is not a situation where he said, don't do it. It's a situation where he didn't say, you may do it, or you must do it. He didn't tell them to. He didn't tell them they could. The fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, it is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I will be treated as holy, and before all the people, I will be honored. They went too far. They went and did something they didn't know they could do. Is that important for the Lord, that they learn the lesson? Don't go too far. Yes. So, last year, in Belize, I was sitting at my desk, which was in a separate building from where our little house was. I had a piece of paper, I forget what it is. I had a piece of paper that I'd left on the counter in the house. Our youngest comes out with that piece of paper. Now, I left it there on purpose. Our youngest comes out with the piece of paper. He says, Dad, I brought you the piece of paper. Now, he is wont to do this kind of thing. Dad, I brought you the piece of paper. No, he wants to be helpful. I asked him, did Mom tell you to bring me the piece of paper? He hemmed and he hawed. Finally, this is what he said and how he said it. She didn't tell me to do anything. Smart. How is that smart? Because he knew the situation he was in. He knew that saying she didn't tell me not to wasn't going to get him anything. She also knew that she had not told him to. Here's my point. It's good to want to be a helper. Does God want us to be helpers? What kind of helper? What is a good helper? The first rule of a good helper is he stays out of the way. Second rule of a good helper, don't do anything until you have been asked to. That's the help. Oh, I can do this. No, I needed that there. They do it all the time. Yes, you want to be a good helper. You want to be a good helper. When they're young, it's just slightly annoying. When they get old, it can cost them their eternal life. This is a principle. We've got to get it. So recognize what they're doing. When they want to help, yes, but there's a way to help. You need to learn this now so that when you grow older. But notice, remember what Ephesians chapter 6 said? Children, obey your parents in the Lord. Honor your father and mother. Now look at this. Before all the people, I will be honored. Understand the connection. The children need to learn to honor us so that when they get old enough to honor God, they do. They need to learn to honor us. You may have seen already the importance and value of fearing the Lord. That's what Leviticus chapter 10 is about. Fear God. Now these next 2 points are really falling under the encouraging obedience. When we talk about what are we looking for in obedience, what we're really, really looking for is immediate and complete compliance. Now, God is graceful to us, so we need to be graceful to our children. But what we're looking for, and what we're trying to train into them, when we say hush, they hush. So on and so forth. About the fear of the Lord. Fear him who is able to destroy both the soul and the body in hell. Yes, there's an element of respect. Yeah, of course. And there's also, I am scared. You scare me. Have you ever read where Ezekiel does a face plant? Isaiah? All these people who see the Lord or some manifestation of him, what do? They are terrified. That's what God wants from us. He wants that from us. And in order for us to give him that, we should learn first to give that to our parents. From the parental perspective, we are trying to teach our children to fear us. And it's not inconsistent with love. It's not incompatible. God does the same thing. A voice came from the throne saying, give praise to our God, all you his bondservants who fear him. What parent in here wants their child to grow up to give praise to God? Who's giving the praise? All you who fear him. If you don't fear God, you're not going to give him praise. We must teach the fear. The fear of the Lord is the instruction for wisdom. It is sound wisdom to fear your name. Honor all people, love the brotherhood. Fear God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is beginning of wisdom. We've got to get it into our children to fear. Now, you won't read this out there. But here's where you have to trust God. He's the one that knows. He created us. He created the little child, the soul that we're training. And we must teach them fear. At the same time, this passage also talks about fear. Hebrews chapter 12. Verse 4. He's talking to grown-up Christians. grown-ups who are Christians. Unfortunately, many of them are immature and not grown-up Christians. You have not resisted to the point of shedding blood. So they're suffering in your striving against sin. You have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. Now, he'll quote from the proverb. Notice this proverb is addressed to them. I realize that the proverb had an initial recipient, but also it's addressed to you. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them. But he, that's God the Father, disciplines us for our good, so that we may share in his holiness. All discipline seems for a moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet, to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Couple words in here that we need to look at. Verse 9 says, furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we, whatever your version says, mine says, respected them. Now, to understand what this is talking about, you have to know that this word is used. The semantic domain of it is quite broad. And the idea is, from the perspective of yourself, you have great shame about yourself. And the more you have shame about yourself, it's because the more you respect that one. Just like God, right? I respect God, and the more I understand God, the more... Now, notice, I love him. And I want to be with him. And he loves me. And he wants to be with me. But at the same time, I feel ashamed about myself. If anyone does not obey the instruction of this letter, take special note of that person. Do not associate with him, so that he will be put to shame. Same exact word. We respect him. We have shame about ourselves. Children respect their father. They have shame, humiliation about themselves. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scripture, they slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th of the second month. You remember this context, right? They weren't prepared for the first month. They should have been. They weren't. The priests and the Levites were ashamed of themselves. Isaiah 45. They will be put to shame and even humiliated, all of them. The manufacturers of idols will go away together in humiliation. Ezekiel, be ashamed and confounded for your ways, O house of Israel. Judges 8:28, Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore. Subdued does not lift up his head. This is this word. This is what children at times feel toward their parents, ought to feel. This is godly. This is what we want in our children. Fear me, I love you, and I want to be in a healthy, wonderful, joy-filled relationship. Part of that is going to go through this humiliation. I'm going to humiliate you just like God does to me. That way, when you grow up, you're ready for when God does it to you, and you react the right way. I'm being humiliated. I need to be trained by this and repent. Notice the Lord, verse 6, the Lord loves those whom he humiliates. Here's the other word that we're looking at. He scourges every son whom he receives. On the lips of the discerning wisdom is found, but a rod is for the back of him who lacks understanding. Now, I have spanking up there. You know, it might be a thump. This is what we call corporal punishment. The word corporal means of the body. A corporal in the army or whatever the corporal is in is of the body. Corporal punishment. Whatever you, sometimes we have a little whacker, sometimes we have a spanking, sometimes we have a rod, whatever the case might be, this is what we're talking about. He who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently, and gently too. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will remove it far from him. A whip is for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the backs of fools. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother. A couple things. Purpose matters. We shouldn't ever, you Google this, you don't even have to, don't ever hit. So, for many years, all around the world, a newborn came out. And what happened to that bottom? You look up, the word will be spank. It's the word. Why did they spank? Don't spank that child. What happens if you don't spank that child? It will die. The spanking is to maintain life. Purpose matters. Some spanking is clearly, everybody recognizes. Of course they'll say to you, now listen, they'll say to you, yes, but we have new technology. They'll go in and they'll suck out what that spanking was supposed to cause, cause them to cry to come out. We have new technology, so you don't have to spank anymore. Right. Yes, we have new technology for keeping them physically alive, but who said to spank them, to give them, or to maintain their spiritual life? And this is the issue, folks. Do we trust God or not? That's as easy, it's as simple as that. Do we trust God? He's the one who says everywhere to spank. I present these, actually not as argument. Is it heartbreaking to spank your child to cause pain? If I have to answer that. The commandment is a lamp, and the teaching is a light, and reproofs for discipline are the way of life. Who in here would like to take their child to the hospital for the necessary operation? Who enjoys that? Nobody. But we all would. God says this is the necessary operation. Sometimes you're going to do other things, but sometimes this is the necessary operation. Proverbs 23, the bottom one. Do not hold back discipline for the child. Although you strike him with the rod, he will not die. You know what God is saying right here? I know it hurts. Get over it. He's saying that to the parents. You need to get beyond this. There was another fable about a donkey. He's going down the trail. Suddenly he just bolts off the trail. And he goes to this cliff. He's teetering on the edge of the cliff. And his owner comes over and grabs him and tries to hold him back. And the donkey, being a donkey, says, I'm not going to have him hold me back, and plunges off the cliff. And the owner says this, if you want to be your own master, I cannot help it. A willful beast must go his own way. Be careful, folks. God tells us there will be times when this is what you must do. 4 uninspired observations, and then we'll be done. These are uninspired because they're coming from me. You will probably find something about it in the text, but I'm just going to tell you them. They're not my observations. I'm not that smart. So I'll tell you where we are, my wife and I are, in training children. We're not where we want to be. But this is where we are. We understand some things. We understand first that obedience training comes first. That's Proverbs 2. You need to go back and look at that. God will give wisdom to the one who has already been doing what he should be doing. Hebrews chapter 5 says the same thing. We understand that obedience training comes first. We understand that heart training is the principle. And we're starting to see the different phases. Yep, with our older ones, I'm not saying we have it down or they have it down, but we understand, yep, there was a period for, and there still is, but definitely an early period of you need to understand obedience. And then a little bit later, you start to see, they not only do they have this obedience thing down, but they're starting to develop hearts. They have hearts that say, I'm sorry. Yes, we all make mistakes. And then there's the period where we're starting to enter, have been for a little while now, where that was just really dumb what you did there. This is where it takes wisdom to understand, and this is where y'all need to keep on talking about this, y'all who have already gone through this, right? So that's where we are. So I'm going to give you some observations about us. At what age should spanking begin? Well, when they begin to manipulate you, you can have already begun to manipulate them. That's often what they're doing. They're trying to manipulate. So the Bosworths, George and Janice told us a few weeks ago that Anastasia, when they were driving home from Kim Osaskalo's baptism, Anastasia said, I remember swimming at a hotel. I went all the way under, even my head, but I wasn't baptized. She 5, 6? She's 6? That takes brains. So you see what's happening here. She's in the ability to be able to process things. That's where she is, which means that she should have already gotten down obedience. Raph, when he came up to me and said she didn't say anything, he should already have gotten down obedience. I won't tell you who this is, but there's a little girl who's less than a year old. Now she's a year old, but she was just a little bit less than a year old. Bring her to church. She started crying. Wah! What happens? Mom gets up. But what happens after a little while? Mom realizes the wah is just to get them up. Who's training who there? And so, they realize it's time for a thump. That crying is not going to get you what you think it is. In fact, it's going to get you the opposite of what you think it is. Nikolai threw a fit at 6 months old. Training needs to start at 6 months. They can become conditioned to understand, to associate wrong behavior with corporal infliction. It doesn't have to be, I'm not saying grand or severe, I'm saying when they start manipulating you, you should already have been starting the conditioning. At what time in any given incident should spanking begin? Remember, we're looking for immediate obedience, and just like I always immediately obey. What should I expect? Okay, so there's a place for grace and mercy, and then there's a time where this is not the time for grace and mercy. This is the time for training in obedience. A rule that we have around our house helped Lee so much. I get it from the Bible. I don't know where we got it from. I forget. But this is the rule. It's very simple. If you disobey, you will be disciplined. And you have that conversation. If you disobey, you'll be disciplined. And in fact, we had it this way. Isn't that great? Isn't that reasonable? It's just natural. Why is it natural? Because God made that rule. So we're just repeating what God says, and God does what's good, and so this is going to be good. So, here comes disobedience. Wham! I said, get up. He doesn't get up. I can throw a fit myself. I can get all emotional, or I can remember the rule. This is so beautiful. It's so wonderful. You just repeat the rule, and you know what? They get it. They understand. In fact, you're training them that you just keep your word. And they're keeping their word. appealing to the rule, you perform your duty as soon as you possibly. Maybe you're driving, you got to pull over. Maybe you're driving, you wait till you get home. Maybe it's right there. You perform your duty immediately. Otherwise, you're not keeping your word. Ecclesiastes. If I had not learned the faulty procedure in, I'm going to count to 3, then I wouldn't be able to share this with you. This is not from Lee, but you realize it. The question is always, who's training whom? That's what's happening here, right? And so you say, I'm going to count to 3. What do you train them? You train them, right? You all know this already. You train them that all they got to do is wait till 3, and then they get to do it. Did they obey during 1? No. What did you teach them? It's okay not to obey during 1. Did they obey during 2? No. Do they obey during 3? No, because what do they do then? They start offering alternatives. But I did this, but I did that, right? You get it. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Am I in the right text here? Ecclesiastes, where am I? 8, yes, 8. Verse 11. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly. Now, we apply that to government and say, man, it takes 15, 20 years for somebody to go to the death row. Yeah, that's true. That's applicable. But this is saying, look, when did disobedience occur? That's when disobedience must be dealt with. Therefore, the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to evil. One more time. I'm only giving you one more warning. What have you trained them? You've trained them that all they need is to just buy a little bit more time. Maybe after the one more warning, you'll start counting to 3. And then give them another warning. Right? You understand. No, this is what we're looking for, is immediate compliance. Always end with affection. Sometimes have them express gratitude. And let me tell you, if you get this down, they generally don't like this, but they'll do it. That's what we've experienced. And I'm assuming in that case that our children are not much different from yours. Spanking is part of a package. Lesson number 2 was about trusting God. Lesson number 3 was about living godly lives. Lesson number 4 was about loving the children. All of that, I'm just going to spank, whack. No, that's not what God is saying. God is saying there's a whole bunch. Disciplining your children, training them is a whole big package. This is one little part of it. I read this week, when children do not receive attention in a positive way, they will get your attention any way they can. We call it negative attention, right? But do you notice what causes it? When they don't get your attention in a positive way. If all you ever do is show up to spank or to say don't, then they're just going to be calling out for. So why isn't my spanking? We spank all the time, but it's not doing anything. Well, what about the rest? What are you doing the rest of the time? I have worked with hundreds of parents who have taught their children to be negative attention seekers. I have never met a parent who taught this deliberately. How did they teach it? Statistics show that an average American spends 7 minutes a week with each of their children. Do better. Show them that you love them. We have found around our house that, like adults, periodically children need recalibrating. This is very important because you forget it. Hey man, you were doing so great with this. We worked on this a month ago and you were doing great, so great that I forgot about it. And then suddenly I realized, wait a minute, you've been doing it for another 3 days. I've seen heads shaking out there. That means this is not the only household this happens to. It means sometimes you gotta we're going to focus on this one again, and it might even take a whack on the hand. I know you're 10, but this is a reminder. I have a wandering steering box. I used to. I got rid of it in my truck. Oh, every 13,000 miles, guess what I had to do? I had to get in there, I'd straighten it up, and then 13,000 miles later, I suddenly realized I'm wandering all over the place. And so I get in there and I straighten it up. This is exactly the way I am. This is the way we all are. Leonardo da Vinci took 14 years to finish the Mona Lisa. There are different sketches of his progress in his notebook that they found. And he'd go back and he'd change the smile. Just a tiny bit. And it would sit there for years. And then he'd go back and he'd adjust this. Just a tiny bit. It has been a privilege and an honor to speak to you these 10 years during our sermons. I pray that the words that we have spoken together and the meditations of our heart have been acceptable to the Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Thank you for listening.